Hey YouTube, welcome to my first ever vlog. My name's Clay, and today we get in a little 5-10 session over at the Wynn, one of my regular games. Play a nice big pot with aces and splash around a little bit. And hope you guys enjoy it. We show up, sit down with 5,300. We got the game just starting, nothing too crazy going on yet. We decide to get a little frisky for the first hand with the 9-7 offsuit from the cutoff. I open and immediately get punished by a regular in the big blind who makes it 130. Not gonna mess around here, so I end up folding, and he comments that I must be playing different since I'm on video, since I folded. So I don't know if that maybe that means I'm getting a little splashy to the 3-bets these days, but we're about 5-6 handed now. There's some talk about if everyone at the table wants to straddle or kick the game up to 5-10-20. Not everyone's in agreement, so it's gonna just be intermittent straddling. We got the ace-8 offsuit in the big blind, and there's a straddle in the game. Folds to me, I limp. Big blind seems to be a pro, makes it 80. We limp call. I'm very confident he can be pretty wide here. Flop comes down king deuce 3 with 2 diamonds. We check and he fires out 30. Pretty easy call here. Not much point in trying to raise or do anything else, and we certainly have the best hand a lot easily enough to continue for such a small bet. Turn's pretty good for us. We pair up the 8. We check it over to him, and now he bets 160 into about 220. We have another very easy decision. No, not much point in doing anything else other than calling here as well. I think he can have a good amount of bluffs still, and he can even have, you know, total no equity bluffs, or hands like 4-5, 5-6. River pairs the 3, we check. He thinks about it a little bit, and he decides to check, and I'm pretty confident I'm winning a good amount here, but he does happen to show down the king-9. Decided not to go for the thin river value. Seems close in his spot. And yeah, he takes down a nice little $500 pot there, so, and we're on to the next hand. I folded for a few hands, and now we're in the same spots as the ace-8. I'm in the big blind, and there's a straddle. Everyone folds to me. I limp in again, and the big blind, who's the same villain from the last hand, makes it 80. We decide to kick it up 340. We know that he's wide here. He's definitely going to have a lot of total airball. Ace-Jack seems like you could go either way, but you definitely want to put in the 3-bet here a good amount. He thinks about it for a while and does the one thing that's gonna make me unhappy, and he makes it 800. Which is gonna put me in a tough spot. I've got about 5k in my stack, so if I wanted to go for the 5-bet bluff here, it would be pretty awkward. I have to put in about 1,600 and then fold to a jam or something. So it's a good play by him. Usually I'm not that big of a fan of flatting the 4-bets out of position with the ace-jack offsuit, but I have an inkling that he's a little bit lighter than he should be here, and I decide potentially against my better judgment to peel one off, go to the flop, see what happens. If I flop a pair, there's a good chance I get stacked, but you know, sometimes you gotta risk it for the biscuit, as they say. Flop comes down 9-3 deuce rainbow, and villain thinks for a little bit, he decides to put out around a half pot bet, which again puts this hand specifically in just pretty, or a lot of my hands in this spot in a pretty tough position. I don't have any backdoors or anything. I decide to let it go, even though I think he might be getting one through with some ace 4, ace 5, king 10, some hands like that. If I had maybe ace queen, I might take one off there. Seems like a tough spot. A couple hands later, we wake up with the king 4 hearts on the button. Cutoff limps in. I decide to put in a little raise to 40, maybe get heads up, see what happens. Hand plays not bad. We get a really nice flop here with the ace king 4, and the cutoff checks, and I decide to put in a bigger than normal bet here, given that I don't have any ace in my hand, and I don't think anyone's getting away from an ace right there. He lays it down though. I don't think he had too much. Folded for a little bit. This hand I'm in the straddle. The same villain who 4-bet me when I had the ace jack opens from the hijack, and we decide to make it 220 from the big blind with the queen jack of spades. Gotta try and win my money back somehow. He lays it down. Nothing too interesting there. Very next hand, I wake up with the ace jack offsuit in the big blind. There's a straddle for 20 on. The small blind opens for 70, and we decide to make it 230. The big blind, who's the same villain that's been giving us some trouble already, thinks about it for a little bit. I feel like I might get punished here again with a cold 4-bet. I think he's a little bit suspicious here, but he ultimately lays it down, and so does the small blind. We take it down pre-flop, no struggle.
Either that or 7.
The same hand as when he made it 800 again.
I don't know what hand that was. I didn't look at the recording.
It's just a good ace.
Very next hand, we look down at the ace 10 of diamonds, and we decide we're gonna go ahead and get in the third 3-bet in a row after the button opens. He opened to 50. We go ahead and make it 180, and he throws out a purple $500 chip. I'm thinking it's a call. The table seems to think it's a call. The dealer starts to make change for him, and he says he wanted to raise, which I tend to believe him, but we end up going to the flop for the 180. Comes down at king 7-4 with 2 clubs, no diamonds. Pretty bad flop for me, and assuming that he actually did want a 4-bet, this was probably a pretty good flop for this player, and I decide to check and let this one go. He makes a bet of about $220 or so.
Maybe.
Did you think I would do it?
He asks if I would have called the 500 pre-flop. I say maybe. I think I would probably fold.
I said it in here.
Been battling both the guy on my left and right so far this session. I'm in the big blind this hand. The small blind limps, calls the straddle for 20. I make it 70, hoping to get heads up and go from there with a medium strength hand, ace 7 offsuit. The big blind seems to be suspicious. I can feel he wants to 3-bet this spot, but he just calls. So does the small blind. We go 3 ways. Flop comes ace 10-10 with 2 clubs. Small blind checks. I decide to check here, and the straddle makes it 150 into about 210. Small blind folds, and I go for the hero fold here. I think that he's definitely going to have a good amount of bluffs, but with his flop sizing, he's already almost representing a 10 or some draws, and I don't feel like facing the game's starting to fill up a little bit. We've got a couple new players coming to the table. I look down at the ace of spades, ace of diamonds, and the cutoff folds to me. I go ahead and make it 50, hoping to get some action, hoping the aggressive player behind me will put in some money, but he folds, and big blind gets to the big blind, and he almost looks like he's gonna fold, but he decides to see the flop. Why not? And it comes down ace queen 3 rainbow, basically the dream flop, but gonna be pretty hard for me to get action. He checks, and I throw out a small bet, $30, hoping to entice him to come along with whatever he's got. The turn is a king, putting a flush draw out there. He checks. It's hard for him to have an ace or too many hands here, but I still decide to bet, see if he can come along. I bet 100, and he lays it down. Next hand we play, it's the following orbit. We go ahead, we're in the big blind. We look down at 2 aces after an open to 40 in the cutoff and a button call and a small blind call. We make it 200. Probably should have made it a little bit bigger here, but I did not see the button had called, and we go ahead and get a call from the cutoff, and I'm thinking we're going to go multi-way to this flop, and it's going to be a good situation, but potentially a tough situation. But luckily the button decides to back raise to 800, which is pretty surprising. We're about $8,000 deep here after I had added on a few hands earlier. I'm thinking that I don't really think he's bluffing here. I decide that I'm gonna put more money in the pot. I don't think there's much reason to just call and let the cutoff come along as well. I make it 1900. I feel like I'm gonna get some action here, and maybe he's even gonna put the rest in. He took a while to think about it and consider it, but eventually he decides to make the call, and we're going to a flop with already over 4K in the middle. Got the ace of spades, ace of hearts, and it comes down to kind of a tough flop to navigate. It's not a terrible flop, but it is potentially a dangerous flop. It comes down king, king, 6. Could have ace king sometimes, although there's not that many combos of that left, and could also have some queens, jacks, 10s potentially, or it's not impossible he could have a hand like ace queen or ace jack suited, maybe even some kind of random suited connector, but I think that's pretty unlikely. I decide to bet out 700 here, and he goes into the tank for a while, counts down his chip stack. He almost looks like he's gonna raise, which would be a very unique spot. And ranges here are just getting pretty tight in general. I'm really putting him on hand like queens or jacks or so right here, and hoping that he can pay off a bet or two. Yeah, he thinks about it for a long time here and decides. Eventually, he decides to put the money in. he calls, and we go to a turn. So the turn's a 6, so the board's completely rainbow. King, king, 6, 6. Pretty locked down board now. I should probably check here a good amount, but for some reason I have an inkling that he does not have a king and that he is not going to be bluffing if I check. So I decide to make another small bet here, kind of unconventional. I think I would usually go for the check here, but I decided to put out 1500, hope to get another street from queens and jacks, hope to check down on the river. He doesn't take too long this time, and he does decide to lay it down. I'm not sure if he made a good fold there with a pair. I mean, I'm looking pretty strong at this point, having 5 bet and bet 2 streets. It's possible he had a hand just like ace queen or queen jack that was floating and would have bluffed if I checked. So not sure I really liked the bet. Wishing I would have checked in hindsight, but what are you gonna do? We win over 5k pot with aces. We can't be mad. A little bit later, we get the double straddle on this hand. 5, 10, 20, 40. We're the button with the 8, 9 offsuit. Folds to us. We decide to get in there, get a little bit frisky with the 8, 9 offsuit. Folds to the big blind or not the big blind, the double straddle who comes along. Board comes down 10, 8, 4, 2 hearts. Pretty decent situation, middle pair. We're usually ahead here. I decide to go for the check back after he checks. Turn is a 10, so 10, 8, 4, 10. He leads out for 100. I've got the best hand here the majority of the time, but not strong enough to raise. River's a 9, and he bets about a little under a quarter of the pot, 100 again. I'm pretty sure I got the best hand, but I don't think it's strong enough to raise here, and I just call. And he was value betting a worse 8. He had 8, 4, and we hit the 9 to avoid any chopping scenarios. For this one, we got the hijack coming in for a min raise, 5, 10, 20. He makes it 40. Cutoff calls, button calls. We're in the smallest blind with the pocket 5s. Decide to come along. It's only a min raise. We're gonna make a set probably, so why not? Flop comes down 4, 4 deuce, 2 diamonds. The hijack and cutoff check, and the button bets 60 into a pot of about 160. So pretty small bet. I'm not going to go anywhere with the 5s. It's not a great situation with 2 players behind me. Either of them could come in for the punishment raise or something like that. Or I might only have 2 outs right now, but turn is an offsuit 7. And it goes check. I'm hoping for him to check back, and luckily he does. And we get a very nice river. We get the offsuit 5 on the river. And I'm thinking if he had a hand that was strong enough to bet, there's a good chance he would have just bet the turn. I don't know if I'm getting a ton of action if I go for the check raise, although it would be a decent option here as well. I bet 150. He calls immediately, and I show him the bad news. I comment that I feel like I got lucky, trying to see if he might give any kind of info on if I was beat before the river, but he doesn't say anything. I think I was probably beat before the river, but that's what rivers are for. We haven't played any hands in a while. We've just been folding mostly, maybe a couple small pots for the last hour. We wake up in one of my favorite situations in poker. Cutoff opens, we're the button. We go ahead and we 3-bet the 8-7 suited. We're very deep. A lot of good things can happen. Anything could happen, you know. But he lays it down, so nothing too fun. We take it down. We'll take it. Can't complain. Next orbit. We are button, we get the 8-9 offsuit, there's a straddle on, folds to us, we go ahead and make it 50, and the big blind decides to, or the straddle decides to see a flop against us. Comes down, jack 5 deuce, 2 diamonds, we have no piece of this, and we could fire out a bet, but I like to check here sometimes. We check it back. Turn is an offsuit 10, so now we're open-ended. He checks. I go ahead and bet 70, just trying to get some folds from some bad ace highs or king highs or some kind of hands that don't have any kind of pair or draw. He calls, and we get one of the nut rivers, the offsuit queen. He checks. We could go for the home run here for a real big bet. But I decide to fire 220, hoping to put any pair in a tough spot, and he lays it down pretty quickly. Maybe had like a 5 or a 2. He didn't think very long. A little bit later, we look down at the dreaded ace-jack, which hasn't been too good for us this session. Low jack opens, we're in the hijack, we call 50. Straddle's been on permanently for a while. Small blind decides to come along, and we see a flop 3-way. Comes down ace king for rainbow. Pretty great flop for us, but could get a little bit tricky if the opener decides to put on a bunch of pressure. But they both check to me. I go ahead and bet 80. I think once the opener checks here, he's usually pretty weak. Could check this back sometimes, but decide to fire. We get a call from the small blind, and I'm pretty sure I'm very far ahead of where he's at right now. Turn is an offsuit 9, and he checks. I decide to get some more value. Go ahead and bet 250, looking to get called by an ace, but he lays it down without thinking too long. Not a bad result. And ace jack has redeemed itself a little bit from there, but it's got a ways to go. At this point in the session, I'm feeling pretty good. We started out losing about 1,500 or 2,000, and now we're back in the black after the big aces hand for about the same amount, 1,500 or 2,000 winning.
All I've done is make the
I've been playing about 4 hours now, and I'm thinking about wrapping up this session and trying to figure out what to do with this footage and how to edit it. We get the ace-4 under the gun suited, one of my favorite hands. And we get 3-bet by a middle position player to 140, which isn't the hugest 3-bet. I can definitely go for the 4-bet here sometimes, but I decide to just call, see a flop, keep the pot to reasonable size, not bloat anything too hard out of position here. We get the king, queen, 10, 2 spades, and a club flop, so I got a backdoor flush draw. He decides to fire out a little over half pot. He bets 170 here, and it's a pretty close situation with the backdoor flush draw. I decide to lay it down, give in. I feel I'm going to face a lot of pressure on the turns, and I don't really want to be check raising this board into a pretty strong range here, so I decide to let that one go. Same villain that just 3-bet me here decides to open into my straddle. We got a nice suited hand with the 8-10 of diamonds. Could 3-bet every once in a while, especially against later position open, but we decide to just peel, see the flop. We get a beautiful jack 9-3 2-diamond flop. I check, and he decides to check back. Turns the 4, and I check again, going for the check raise again. and the river pairs the 4, but I make my flush, and I just don't think I'm going to get a bet from him here. If I check too often, I think he's just going to show down with ace high, so I decided to try and extract some value. I can have a ton of bluffs, any kind of low cards that didn't pair up. I'm expecting to get called a decent amount here by ace highs, but he makes a good fold. We take it down. I tell him I was trying to check raise at every time in the hand, but one of the last hands of the session here, I opened the 9-10 offsuit from the cutoff for 50 into a straddle. Definitely a little bit loose, but seems fine. We get a defend from the straddle. Board comes Jack 6-7. Rainbow, pretty good board for us. We got a gut shot. Villain probably doesn't hit this board too hard. We bet 80, and he decides to call. And turn is a brick. Turn is a brick to putting a flush draw out there, and villain checks again to us. I could definitely barrel off here sometimes, but I decide to check. Maybe putting in a bluff on the river, depending, and see what happens. River's an ace, and villain checks, and I decide that I am gonna take a little stab at it. We got one of the worst possible hands we can have. I would go ahead and bet 230, and villain comments that it was not the best river for him, and he thinks about it for a little bit and decides to make the fold. So we got one through, you know. Not too many big bluffs this session, but maybe a last hand we're gonna have for the session in the recording. We got the double straddle on, and we wake up on the button with kings. Under the gun opens to 100, and under the gun 1 calls, and it's pretty amazing situation. Friend came by to say hi to me during this hand, so I decided to give him a little sweat here. We make it 450 on the button, show off our kings to our friend, and I'm expecting to get a lot of action here. Under the gun ends up folding pretty quickly, actually, and so does under the gun too after a little bit of deliberation. And unfortunately, we don't get any action, but we take it down. I decided to show the table my kings because, you know, why not? Why not? And we play for another hour or so, but we don't really get any notable hands, and I decide to wrap up the session. Just a little one. After all is said and done, we cash out. We end up cashing out for 11,900. We were in for 10,300, so profit about 1,600 for a 5-hour session. Not too bad. Really all came down to that one big hand. Hey YouTube, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you'll continue following me on my journey as I figure out how to edit videos and record videos better in a funner way going forward. Let me know what you thought. Anyway, I'm out.